The boy was different from what people expected. He wasn't loud or disruptive. He wasn't like the other kids. He sat quietly, scribbling in his notebook, his eyes focused on something far beyond the noise around him. No one could understand why he was always alone, why he chose books over games or friends. Some days the boy would arrive early, sitting in the same spot in the park. He would bring a bag, but instead of snacks or toys, it was always filled with books and notebooks. It was a mystery to everyone. To the others in the neighborhood, he was just another kid, one of the countless faces in the park. But to him, this was his world. One day, curiosity got the best of the cop. He had watched the boy for weeks now, always from a distance, always with questions. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about this boy that drew him in. The others in the neighborhood were easy to understand. Loud, chaotic, always looking for trouble. But this boy, he was a puzzle. The cop approached the bench where the boy sat, his gaze never leaving the pages of his notebook. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The boy didn't answer right away. His pencil continued to move across the page, his attention completely absorbed in his work. He seemed unbothered by the question. For a moment it almost seemed like he hadn't even heard him. Finally the boy looked up, but only for a moment. His eyes briefly met his, before flicking back to his notebook. "Just reading," he said, his voice calm, without a hint of resistance. Reading? The cop couldn't understand it. This boy wasn't playing or causing trouble. He wasn't distracted like the other kids. What could a kid his age possibly be focused on? "What are you reading?" the cop asked again, this time stepping a little closer, intrigued by the boy's focus. The boy glanced up briefly before returning his gaze to his notebook. Math. Math? The cop was expecting something else, maybe a comic book or a game on his phone. But math? This kid sitting in the middle of a park was doing math? His eyebrows furrowed in confusion. He scoffed. "You? Math?" The boy didn't flinch. His pencil continued its steady rhythm across the page, his eyes narrowing slightly in concentration. He was solving problems, complicated ones. It wasn't just simple addition or subtraction. It was algebra, geometry, equations that didn't seem possible for a kid his age. The cop's curiosity grew. He couldn't help but lean in a little closer, trying to understand what this boy was doing. The boy's notebook was filled with equations, some of which looked more like college-level math. There were even sketches of engineering designs, diagrams of mechanical parts. How did a kid know how to draw something like this? How did he know how to solve these equations? He glanced at the boy, his confusion growing. "How did you learn all this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more unsure. The boy shrugged, the only movement he made before responding. "From books, and my dad. He's always told me to learn." From books? And his dad? The cop thought about it. His dad must have been some kind of genius to teach a kid like this. The more he thought about it, the more baffled he became. The neighborhood was filled with kids who couldn't care less about anything. And here was this kid, sitting alone, learning things most adults would find impossible. The cop stood still, watching the boy work. The world around them seemed to fade away as the boy continued solving the equations with ease. The pencil moved quickly across the page, pausing only for a second before continuing. He barely looked up, as though he didn't need to. For a long moment the cop stood there, unsure of what to say. Finally he muttered, almost to himself, "You're really something." The boy didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the compliment before returning to his work. His focus remained unshaken, even by the cop standing just inches away from him. The cop turned and began to walk away, but then he stopped. He looked back at the boy, the realization hitting him like a wave. This boy wasn't like anyone he had ever met. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't seeking attention. He wasn't doing anything to fit in. He was simply being himself, and in doing so, he had found something most people never did: purpose. The next few days, the cop found himself thinking about the boy constantly. He went about his day as usual, but every now and then, his thoughts would drift back to the boy on the bench. He couldn't understand why. What made him so special? He continued to see the boy in the park every afternoon. Sometimes he would walk by. Sometimes he would sit and watch him from a distance. He wanted to approach the boy again, but each time something held him back. What if the boy didn't want to be bothered? What if he was just another kid trying to escape the world around him? But no matter what, the cop couldn't shake the feeling that the boy had something important to offer, something he couldn't quite grasp yet. One afternoon he decided to try again. He saw the boy sitting on the bench, just like always, his notebook open in front of him. This time, instead of just walking past, the cop sat down on the bench next to him. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there watching the boy work. The boy didn't seem to notice him at first. He was too focused on his notebook, his pencil moving swiftly across the page as he solved another set of equations. But after a few minutes he glanced up, as if sensing the cop's presence. "Did you need something?" the boy asked, his tone still calm and unbothered. The cop hesitated for a moment before answering. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about what you're doing." The boy raised an eyebrow, slightly curious but still distant. "What about it?" "I don't get it," the cop said, shaking his head slightly. "You're just a kid. Why are you so focused on math? Why aren't you out there with the others?" The boy paused, then looked at him for a long time, his eyes almost unreadable. "Because they don't get it. I do this because it's what I want to do. It's what I love." The cop didn't know how to respond. He had been expecting an answer, but this was not what he had anticipated. The boy's response was simple, yet profound. He wasn't doing it to impress anyone or to prove something. He was doing it because it was his passion. "I want to be an engineer," the boy added after a moment, as if reading the cop's mind. "I want to build things. I want to make a difference." The cop sat back, absorbing the boy's words. For the first time in his life, he realized that he had been living in a world where success was defined by what others thought of him. But this boy, this young kid, was living in a world where success was about what he wanted to achieve, not what others expected. As the days went by, the cop found himself drawn more and more to the boy's quiet ambition. He began to realize that there was something powerful in his pursuit of knowledge. It wasn't just about the math. It was about the drive, the discipline, and the determination to do something meaningful. The boy wasn't waiting for anyone to give him permission. He was making his own path. And slowly the cop began to understand. This wasn't just a boy with a talent for numbers. This was someone who was capable of changing the world, if only he was given the chance.